Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 54, and I've got a special guest for you again. Before we get to that special guest, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, so, do all the things that you do to make sure you stay in touch with the podcast. But today, my guest is a performer, a producer, writer, and a director of over 16 years. She is the writer and producer of Inconceivable, the totally true one-woman, semi-fertile Quasi musical, which is a one-woman comedy show depicting an honest look into the complexity of modern infertility. It is an expression of her own fertility experience expressed through humor and comedy, and has graced stages large and small all over the world. I'd like to present Meirav Zur. Meirav,
Hi, thank you. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
I am wonderful. I'm really curious about this whole this whole conversation is really interesting to me because I don't think I've ever had a comedian on my show. And I don't know if you can call yourself a comedian of sorts, but it's a comedy show. So tell me about you. Tell me about why do you do what you do? Tell me who you are.
Sure. I guess, it all kinds of, it's like it all ties in and doesn't, as people do.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm professionally, I'm all about performance and theater, specifically live theater. I've done some screen work too, but I, started out as a typical actor. I quickly went on to kind of create my own work. So I inevitably became also a producer and director and writer. And I was just basically creating shows and performing in them, and just creating new shows and performing in them, and just constantly doing that professionally. I love it. I love everything about theater. I'm a big believer that theater is very parallel to real life. I know people that aren't into theater or haven't had any experience with either side of theater don't really see that, but it's just there. And, I was doing this for years. Meanwhile, in parallel, in my private life, I was experiencing with my husband infertility, and then also secondary infertility. And I wasn't talking about it with anyone because clearly we were the only freaks of nature in the world because no one around us was talking about it either. So that's just how it felt like. And I didn't want to even talk about it because I didn't want to be even more different and, pitied or misunderstood or whatever. So I just didn't talk about it. I made my husband not talk about it, and that was it. And we just, kept on as it was. And my husband actually always did want me to talk about it with someone, but I just couldn't. And then something just clicked, I guess, a few years ago. And I said, okay, I think I might be ready to talk about it with someone, or maybe people that I'm close to, but I just didn't know how to do it. And that was really frustrating because I was like, okay, now I feel like I'm okay with it, but now what do I do? Like, what do I say? I don't want to start crying and making it this whole devastating thing. And I didn't know how to do it. And when I finally thought of that, I said, okay, what if I utilize my professional background? And so I said, okay, I think I could do it with comedy. I could do that. That finally became kind of this language that I was able to kind of figure things out, because throughout the whole time, I was using comedy throughout, because if it's if you don't laugh, you cry type of situation. Right. So there would be that. And I said, okay, maybe I could just do something with that. So I figured that was that. And then I just went all in. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. And I'm not going to do that with one of my friends and then meet my other friend. I just want to get it over with. So I basically decided to create this event. I literally created a group text with some of my close friends. And I said, hey, come to my house on this and this date for some hormones and cookies, or I don't know what I called it. And they all, of course, know what I do and everything. And they're like, okay, we'll come. I don't even think they knew what they were coming to, but they indulged me, and they're awesome. And they came. And I literally had my close friends sitting in my living room in front of me as I was in front of them, just kind of telling them everything that I was going through for the past few years. But I didn't tell them like a story. I told them with silly characters and funny songs, and I used props, and I had this whole like, visual aid thing going on. Like I just did it different, and it was funny. And my friends were laughing also, it was like, and I was like, okay, I can do that. And then when it ended, it was like so exposing. So I said, okay, we're done. I literally went to the front door and opened it and expected them to just shuffle out and we'll never have to talk about it again. But what happened was they stayed and they kept talking. It kind of brought up a lot of stuff that they had experienced, similar stuff. And that got me thinking, okay, wait a minute. What is happening here? We're a group of supposedly close friends, but we didn't really know all these little bits and pieces about each other.
Yeah.
This is clearly happening elsewhere. Like that got me really interested in that. And my friends, of course, they said, you have to do this as one of your shows. Like you have to create this as a show. And I initially doubted because I said, who would want to come see this? Like that, people that don't know me, like who'd be interested to watch, some strange woman talk about her reproduction issues, on stage and laugh about it or whatever. And, but I said, okay, I took it as like a professional challenge. Sure. And I worked on it for over a year. I created this solo comedy show, knowing fully well that it was only going to be a one night only event. But I said, I'm just going to do it just to, prove to myself that I can do it, I guess. And I did it. And that after that one show, it just kept going because the response was just so overwhelming. I really didn't expect it. People, came up to me after the show and were like, thank you for telling our story, or thank you. This is something that our daughter was apparently going through, but we had no clue what she was really going through, or, things like that really shocked me. And I heard a bunch of other people that started sharing their story and, things I didn't even know about. And it just kind of took a life of its own from there. And I got to do all these things I never expected through the show and meet all these people and hear all these stories. And not only did it clearly make me feel not alone, but I was like, wow, there's, this whole world of silence, around this thing. And then I was like, oh, okay, now I got it. Now it's like my mission. Like I have to have people see this show so they can know what their friends are going through and their families going through, because, statistically everyone knows someone, even if they don't know. Yeah. So, that's how that started.
There's so many interesting things in there.
Yeah.
I want to define, I think we should define one thing before we kind of move forward for those who don't know what secondary
right
infertility is. Can you explain that to those people?
Sure. So infertility basically is kind of like the inability to procreate, to have kids. And secondary infertility is when people already have a child, but they can't have a second or third, or they're just unable to expand their family for whatever reason. Right. And specifically with my husband and me, we had what's called unexplained infertility and unexplained secondary infertility, which I call the fun kind. Oh, yeah. Because it's more frustrating because there's no clear reason as of today in medicine, but there's no clear reason. Right. So,
and that, that's me and my wife have had three miscarriages since we started. And luckily for us, we are about to have our first child together. And that, like, I feel like when you deal with secondary infertility, there is just there's this burden of expectation that is almost more defined and more, I don't know, it's more, I don't know a good word for it, but it's just destructive.
Oh, way. Totally.
And I'm curious, like, what is your experience with that when you think about your journey? Like, what was it like for you to deal with that specifically?
That was like, I mean, can I curse on the?
Oh, fuck yeah!
That's like it's like a mind fuck. It's like a complete mind fuck, because it's like, yeah, for us going through it, at the beginning when we couldn't, have our first child, and it was like frustrating, whatever. And then we had our child. And then when we tried again, we were like, okay, the mechanics obviously work. We have proof,
Yeah.
Why? And then it's even more frustrating. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, medically, it's even more unexplained
Right.
because, okay, it happened, but now for some reason it's really not happening. We don't know. And that's just like, there has to be a reason. You're just not there yet, or you don't want to, or I don't know what it is, but tell me the reason, and
Yeah.
I'm not a medical professional. And then it kind of changes you into this, Google medical professional, which
Right.
is horrible.
Yeah.
And also, socially, with me, I found out that it's like, when I did find that I could speak about it, and then I started meeting people that, in this community of infertility, I kind of, I'm one of those people in secondary infertility where you feel like you're not there. You're too infertile for the fertiles, but
Right.
and you're too fertile for the infertiles, and you're kind of like, oh, okay. And so there's so much like guilt and frustration, and it's crazy. And then there's also, our child, which, I have it also in my show. Like at some point it was okay at first, but at some point she starts asking for siblings, and it's like, oh, okay, now it gets complicated. And so, yeah, it's very complex.
Yeah. And it's, because we talked about it with people after, I want to say the second or third one. I can't remember exactly when. It was right in there. And I feel like when I look back, there are times where I'm like, the silence was actually more comfortable, and because when you talk about it, people have no idea what to say. They have
Right.
absolutely no clue. And so you learn things about the people around you, the friends that you hold, the family that you hold, that you realize that they have absolutely no idea how to be empathetic towards something like that, or even be compassionate towards talking about something like that. And I found that to be, in my line of work, it's fascinating because I study mental health, I study people, and I don't really take anything personal because people are just ignorant in so many facets of life. So there's no point, but not everybody can do that like I do. Right. And so I think that just makes it all the more complicated. Like it's almost, and I hate to say this, but it almost feels more comfortable to be silent when we're talking about that than
Yeah.
it is to talk to people. Even people who've been through it don't know necessarily how to be compassionate about it. It's a really interesting and
Yeah.
such a complex topic. It's remarkable
Totally.
that you do this whole show on it. What are your thoughts on that? Like on that
I
silent
mean,
versus,
I agree. I think maybe another reason why I didn't talk about it for so long, because it was, more comfortable and convenient. I didn't have to find all the ways to explain something. I didn't have to see how a person is understanding or not understanding. And, and I've talked about this a lot. And I remember one person I was talking to said, oh, so, you're doing this show about infertility and you're speaking, as if you're like advocating, and talking about it, but people are talking about it. I mean, people know. And I responded, yes, you're right. Nowadays, there are more people that know the word infertility, and they've heard IVF, and they've heard of, these things, but they don't know what that entails. That entails a day-to-day, hour by hour craziness. It is
yeah,
so consuming and so loaded, that it's not enough, one word. It's not enough, to know. So again, when you're saying people don't understand how to be empathetic, it's because they don't really understand what that is.
yeah,
They don't understand what it is. What does it mean to go through this?
right,
And even if, people are dealing with infertility who are not necessarily going through an IVF treatment, that's still a daily thing. And
yeah,
I mean, mental health and infertility, it's like hand in hand. It's like all the time. And it's crazy. And it's also, I think, even more exponential because I think, we're part of that generation. And sadly, I think it's still going on, that when we were at the age of learning about, sex and reproduction and all that, it was all around that time when we were having, sex ed and things like that. And we were completely misinformed or got lack of complete information on this. And some of that information that did seep in was mainly stay away from it because it happens so quickly. Pregnancy is like this. It's like, you walk by the opposite sex and bam, so you better watch out. And so you are sure that 1 and 1 is 3. Like you are sure it's going to happen. You once you are trying, there's no such thing as trying. It's instant.
Yeah.
So when something, and after going through, anything like miscarriages and infertility, and you start to kind of, learn more about it, you're like, oh my God, like a child being born is practically a miracle. Practically planets are lined up for this to happen because it's so complex and so intricate and so many factors go into this. So, and that's a great thing that I think we missed. Not to mention that I think, generally men and women, specifically women, females, don't really know yet how their body works. They don't all, like you ask an average woman, and even me, like when I was going through it, you don't really understand how your body is supposed to work. So of course it's going to be even more frustrating and you're going to even feel, why don't we know these things? Why is this? We are living in this body. Why are we not, understanding how it works? And also mental health. Like, why are we not understanding this is a complete, thing?
I think to add to that, what makes it all the more complicated is if you don't have the right relationship with the person that you're with. I can't imagine how difficult it would have been had, like, I'm a remarkably empathetic person, my wife, and I watched her go through this, and that's what you do as a man, I think, is that you watch your wife or your girlfriend or, whatever relationship you have with this person, you watch them go through this. And there's really nothing I can do. There's really nothing that I can't, I can't make things happen more, right? I can't do anything else.
Yeah.
And so you're trying to, as a man, be supportive as you can. And one, if you don't have a man that is supportive, I mean, that's just, I can't even imagine what that would feel like for a woman to go through that.
Yeah.
But, it's exhausting it's two different experiences. Is basically what I'm trying to say, is like women have to deal with the constant tracking, the constant kind of, how do I create some form of support for myself of my body is going to do this. It's just going to take time, and that's nearly impossible sometimes when you're consistently failing at this seemingly, what we're taught is easy idea of what,
it's
supposed
nature.
to happen. Right. And then men, I think, historically have to go through this feeling of helplessness, and if you don't know how to deal with helplessness as a man, oh man, it's uncomfortable. I mean, it's I think I'm lucky. Well, it's odd that I say lucky, but I've dealt with helplessness before. I've lived through that concept. I lost my dad to suicide, so I feel and understand that feeling and how to work through it and process it very well. It was remarkably difficult watching my wife go through that. But if you've never been through that, that is its own experience that is remarkably hard. It's so hard on two different people in two different ways. And I still remember some of the conversations me and my wife would have of like, she would ask me like, how are you feeling? And I'm like, I don't even know how to explain it to you. Right.
Yeah.
And then she would do the same thing. Like, I don't even know how to explain it to you. I'm like,
yeah,
I think it's got to be okay. And that can be so disconcerting in a relationship. And if you don't have a good relationship, that's really hard.
Yes. I have to add to that, going into creating a new life, which for some people is still easy, as we learned it was supposed to be.
Right.
And some people, create life unexpectedly and things like that. But, when you're going into this, if you're planning it, you better be all in with it's such a, it's such a team effort, really.
Yeah.
And especially with infertility and going through all that, if you're not fully all in, supportive, part of this team, it is even more difficult. And it's already incredibly difficult as a default. And I have to say that while I was, I remember that my husband and I were at one of the clinics or something. We were talking to someone, and she was telling us about all these couples that have gone through IVF, for example. So it means that they've gone through the whole infertility thing. They've started this IVF process. Some of them going through multiple cycles. Eventually they did have a child, and then they ended up divorced. Because everything you just said, it's so much, and it can be such a strain. And then, oh my God, so now you have kind of like the goal you were going for, but you don't have the initial vision of what, so now what? So it's such a strain. And I think it's it's also very sad that a lot of people going into this don't know that. And I for sure am one of them. Like, when my husband and I went into this, we didn't know how much of a strain it'll be. We just eventually went to the doctor, and he said, this is what you need to do. And we said, okay, it's the doctor. And we did what we were told, but no one said, oh, by the way, you should, look out for your mental health. And by the way,
this is what it's going to feel like.
Yeah. And you might encounter this and all the people around you and, physical things. No one said that. There was no pamphlet, just like there's no pamphlet for having, raising a child. There's definitely no pamphlet for infertility, which is odd because you can make one for that. I mean, you can make some little, a little heads up. That would be nice. And, and it's very sad that that's still the state of things.
Yeah. It's, like I still remember, so many conversations between me and my wife. And I think what helped us was when we started trying for a baby, I had just gotten home from Afghanistan. So I had a year-long deployment, kind of separated from my wife. She was going to like grad school during that time. So before I left, she was in grad school. While I left, she was in grad school. And when I came home, she was finishing grad school. And so throughout this whole time, she's going through all of these, this remarkable stress, as am I. I'm just in a different place. And so I think that stress, that adversity, all of those obstacles that we were facing when we started doing this process, and it became our focus because she ended grad school not long after I came home. It became a form of kind of, we were coming together naturally because we had just gone through so many different obstacles. And I think when you really learn how to do that, and I think we were, as tragic as it may be to go through that stuff set us up for success, kind of stepping into that process of, we started with just trying, right? And no IUI, no IVF, no nothing like that. It was just, hey, we have a fertility doctor, and I think she started certain medications and stuff like and vitamins, and we were trying for about a year, and that's when I think right when I came home, she had her first chemical pregnancy, and then it wasn't for I think a year and a couple months, maybe a little bit less, when she had her first miscarriage. And it was, I mean, that first one was hard, but it was a chemical pregnancy, and not to dismiss it, but it certainly wasn't nearly as hard as seeing an ultrasound of what we had, and then realizing, it was the ovum. What is I can't think of the word right now. Where there's cells, but there's no life. What is that called?
Yeah.
It's
I missed
ovum.
it too, but yes. Yeah. I can see what you're saying, but
basically, like, we saw that, and it's, that's hard, and when I still remember kind of getting in the car and just no words, just tears, and again, like, I feel absolutely helpless. I'm sure she felt absolutely helpless. And it's just, how do you, if you don't think about that as a couple before you start that, like, you do not know what you're getting into, because that can be a moment of real separation or real connection.
Yeah, it's totally. And actually every moment is like that. Every moment can be, this moment that you're, going to work together to move forward, or it's going to chisel away at you moving forward. And it's one of those choices that it's like such a pain that you have to, consciously make, but you have to consciously make, because that's what you that's what you can do, because everything else is just so out of your control and so out of, so much. So yeah, that it's vital having that good partnership.
It's a blighted ovum, by the way.
Oh, okay. Right. Yes. That would have not come to me in the next hour, but
I know I had to look it up because it does bother me, but
yeah.
So tell me with your show, obviously, I feel like at this point with having a show like yours, you've kind of stepped into this realm of becoming like the expert on advocacy for this. So tell me what you've kind of learned from this show over the last, how many years have you been doing it?
I've been doing this since November 2017.
Wow.
And also paused a bit during the pandemic, of course.
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me what have you learned in those, 5 years of running the show?
I mean, like everything I'm talking about now, these are things I would have never even thought about then. So what I've learned is definitely, it's okay to try to figure it out. It's okay to, talk about things. I really do think that I wasn't ready to talk about it. And it was, I was doing like, I was at my own timing, and it was okay. But I really do think that if I knew more people like that around me, then I would have not thought it was so strange to talk about or so uncommon. And it would have been so much more, so much less of a burden. It would be, there'd be more healing opportunities, more, kind of ways to wrap your brain around, because there's so much to wrap your brain around.
Yeah.
And, you end up doing this, like, in your brain, it's you go off on all these tangents, and it's like, you're churning all this water of like craziness. So, I remember that like one time we were at the start of another cycle, and my fertility doctor said, "Oh, we're starting at this clinic. There are like these group therapies if you want to go to, but you don't have to go to." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not going to that. Like group therapy in general, that's for crazy people." Like, like I never would have thought. But if he would have said, "You have to go, like just try it."
Yeah.
I'm sure that if I would have gone, I would have been like, "Oh, people like me. Oh, and it's okay.
Right.
And we're not crazy, and it's okay. And this is,
Right.
everyone's got mental health. It's a thing. It's, taking care of yourself." And I just didn't know that. And that's just such a shame, because it's just like, it's all this, lost time and unnecessary pain and, all this stuff. And that's, I think that's what I learned. I think it's okay to kind of, if it feels like a risk, take that risk to talk about it. Yeah. Definitely. And for me, with this show, it was everything. It was exposing my very personal story, not just a personal story of, let's say, like my childhood. This is like super literally, privates. Like it's that,
right.
Exposing that. And also it was professionally, it was my first solo show. It was the first time I was literally alone on stage performing. So it was a lot for me to do. And it's, this weird kind of odd therapy session. Like it's therapy for me, it's therapy for the audience. It's really, a strange kind of thing, but it's there. So I think the main thing learning it from it is there's so much that can be done. Just like, it's okay to talk about it, to open up a little bit about it. And,
what initially kind of gave you the courage, or I guess what was the stubbornness behind, like, obviously stepping into this show that has such a deep connection to you and your soul and your private life. But not only that, but this first solo attempt at running a show like that. I can't, right now, I can't even, like, I know I've done it. Like I haven't necessarily done the acting. I'm not a theater
Yeah.
person. I'm one
Oh,
of those
and
people that is
yeah.
not a theater person. But I've gotten up on stage and talked to people. You know, I've talked to
Yeah.
hundreds of soldiers and about my suicide attempt and my life and everything like that. But you know, I know where my ambitions lie, or not necessarily ambitions, but courage. Where did yours come from, and what did you kind of do to prepare yourself for that?
Um, it was kind of maybe a culmination of a few things. At the time, professionally, I had these multiple shows going on, but I wanted to kind of do more. And there's always that issue of like, budgets and technical stuff. And so, a solo show is very easy production wise because it's just me. Tech is much easier, the set, everything, lighting, it's all much, a smaller scale in many respects. So I said, I should try that, but I was like, what am I going to talk about then? What am I going to do a solo show about? And I could have performed a solo show that was written about, a historic figure or someone, whatever, but nothing really kind of like, called out to me
Felt
to
right.
say, okay, this is it. And then at that time, it we had a miscarriage. It was our, I think, third or fourth, but it was, I think, the most crushing one because, after a while of infertility, and we decided, okay, we're not doing any treatments or anything. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't, because it's just too much, brain wise and relationship wise and family wise. And we're like, we have a daughter, we have to, look out for her. We can't have this strain anymore. Let's just, go with the flow. If it happens, it happens. If not, it's not. And it was this like kind of crazy, stressful time with work. Or I had like shows, and I started like kind of feeling kind of weird. But I was like, okay, I don't know what's happening. It's too much stress, whatever. And then at some point, I kind of realized that I haven't had my period in a while. And so, what happened was we went through a miscarriage within 2 weeks of finding out that we were pregnant, because I found out that we were pregnant very, very late.
Wow.
And so it was literally, we found out I was pregnant, like, officially. And then it was right about that time to do the first scan, just because it was so late. So we had a scan, we heard a heartbeat and everything. And it was like an initial thing, but we said, okay, your major scan is in 2 weeks, go then. Okay, fine. We heard the first ultrasound is fine. And we weren't telling anyone just yet. We went in for the ultrasound, and just like last time, I was like, oh, just don't tell us if it's a boy or a girl. We just want to know that it's healthy, And then there was like this silence, and you just know like what's wrong. There's no heartbeat. So it's like, when you find out like that, it was just like this up and down in such a small amount of time. And then I had to go in to do a DNC, which I don't know if you had that lovely experience of, but it's this surgical procedure to kind of, take out all the stuff, but whatever. Anyway, so there was that. And, and it was just so much, we were bawling like in front of this nurse because what else could we do? And it was like, and so after that, I think I just kind of felt like, I'm done. Like there's no reason, like, why am I not talking about it? I think I kind of felt like that, but again, I just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So I just said, okay, and then when I did it in front of my friends and I said, okay, I got that out, and they urged me to do the show. I kind of said, could that be the show? Like, could that be a solo show that and it kind of came together in that way. And, it took me a long time. I took a long time to do, it was a whole year. I took my time. I didn't want to rush it because it's such a loaded thing. And so it took a while, but when it, and when it was ready, it was just like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna, I'm there with the ready show 2 seconds before showtime for the premiere. And I'm like, okay, is this happening? But you just, you take the leap, and that's just kind of, I guess, that courage part. You just, okay, we're here. Might as well, go all in.
Yeah. Yeah. You almost just get yourself to the point where you can't make any other choice but forward.
Right. And it's this whole kind of, concept that it's ironic because, while I was going through this personally, I'm doing these shows, including improvisational shows, and I've been running, workshops, and the whole thing with improv. I don't know if you've heard, but it's this concept of yes and, which is such a wonderful concept for life. Have you heard of this?
I haven't. I'm curious now.
So this is awesome. Okay, so I don't know if you've ever seen any improv, like Whose Line Is It Anyway?
Yep.
Or so that's short form improv. And there's also this thing called long form improv, which is basically a whole play, a whole like hour long that's been made up on the spot. But the basic concept in order to make it work is that foundation of yes and, which basically means when you're on stage, whatever you suggest, or if you're suggested something, you have to say yes. It's not the word yes, but you have to go with it. And not only that, you have to do and. That means you have to contribute and add something to it, because the whole purpose is to make the scene move forward. Mm-hmm. So if someone comes, your partner on stage says, did you bring the rope to climb the tree? And you're like, dude, we're on stage. There's no tree here. There's no, what are you talking about? Or no, we're at a bank or whatever. Then you basically killed the scene and everyone's looking at you and you have nothing. But if you said yes, you're like, yeah, I brought the rope and I also brought some marshmallows we can snack on top, whatever. Like you throw in another thing and suddenly, oh, there's marshmallows. Like, people like picture this thing and you have this whole scene set up and you're moving forward. And so that's kind of like the concept, that a lot of people that, know this thing, they kind of say, wow, that's good to do for life. Because, in life, if something happens and you just, block it and stop it, it's just kind of like this kill zone that, nothing can happen after that. But if you go with that flow and maybe contribute something or add to it or see how you can expand on that, then things move forward. And so that's basically what I was not doing that whole time personally. And once I did it, once I said yes, to talking about it and contributing and actually creating more, all these things happened. Like, the people came up and talked to me and I, I got another show booking and, I took it to, off Broadway and I had, I met all these people. I was in all these things, it's these things that like, I didn't even expect when I first, opened my mouth about it. I just wanted to basically say the words without crying. So it's like, and it's, this great thing that if you kind of adopt it in some way, it's very helpful.
Without ever knowing it, I've certainly adopted it.
Yeah.
Right? That's the interesting thing about, the correlation between like this story and my own of, I lost, like I said, I lost my dad to suicide at 6. And then I nearly ended my own life when I was 25. So about 7 years ago. And in 2015, that kind of choice brought me to a point of understanding silence to a level that I had never understood before. And I got to this point where I'm like, if I keep doing what I'm doing, right, I'm effectively killing the scene, right? Someday it's not going to be the scene though. It's going to be myself.
Yep.
And what I found is that I just literally had to start with expression. I had to talk to someone. And so I started with my friends. I told my 2 best friends about what I had gone through a couple of days before. I told my sister, and then I told my mom, which is arguably the hardest conversation I've ever had to have in my life. And I have yet to find something that compares. I've talked to people out of suicide, but still my mom and that conversation will never, I don't think anything will ever lapse that conversation in hardness. And I find myself now just kind of looking at everything that has happened to me, and I certainly haven't had any less tragedy throughout, the last 7 years. I've been to Afghanistan once, to include, all the miscarriages. I lost my grandpa last year. I lost a soldier to a firearms accident, one that I was in charge of in Afghanistan. I lost 4 guys in my battalion to suicide before that. And so I haven't been without tragedy, and yet I keep going, and I find myself in a remarkably beautiful place, in this home with this wonderful woman that I understand, that she understands me. I have a stepson, and I also have now a baby coming in June. And the interesting thing is I'm still, as much as I understand and enjoy how much I have right now, because of what I've been through, especially with miscarriage, she's not here yet. And so I don't know how to be comfortable yet, with her until she's here in my hands, just like holding her. There's moments where, my wife will pull out the Doppler and listen for her heartbeat because she can't feel her moving. And I'm like, I put my hand on her and she kicks me and I'm like, she's good. It's like, there's still a sense of discomfort there that she's not here yet. And who knows what can happen. And it becomes such a hard, even when we feel like we're successful, we're not yet. You just never know with life. It's such a remarkable thing, and yet it's such a tragic thing. And I do love, that idea of improvisation, and I think I've absolutely used it, and sometimes more effectively than other times. And I think one of those times is now, where I'm like, make sure you're saying yes and
yeah. It's like, it's this, they've whittled it down to these two words, but it's just, it's such an easier concept that way to grasp. And I always say, clearly use some common sense. It's not if someone offers you, crystal meth and you're like, yes, and, it's not that. It's just, but it's a way to kind of, go with the flow. And, when I was like, looking back and I said, oh my God, I was not doing that. I was not doing that. And I've been, kind of, preaching it. And then I kind of said, okay, yeah, I get that now, and so that it's kind of like very liberating in a way, to know that, okay, it's possible. Now I get it. Okay. But yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned, by the way, that you are not a theater person and you're not into theater, but the fact that you study people is theater, because theater is basically that. It's people and how they function and how they work with each other. And so and I love that about theater too. It's like, it gives you so much understanding and tolerance, and, because there's so much to each person that, we don't see that when we're talking to people. Like you don't see all their baggage and issues and problems. Everyone's got them. Yeah. And it's, it's a nice way to kind of remind yourself like, hey, we're all these complex people with our, set of circumstances and whatnot. So, yeah.
It is funny because I talked about in my book about how I was an incredibly good actor for 19 years of my life. And when I say, let me clarify, when I say I'm not a theater person, I don't go to the theater very often, but I certainly am. I do understand that I was an incredible actor, and I, in some ways, still am. But I don't do it around the right people. You have to act, right? You can't just be 100% you, because that in some cases is crazy. In other cases, it's just mindless. It can be,
it is and it isn't. Because when we were younger, there was no acting. It was just that's who we were. And it was so pure. And, if you look now at like a group of, 5-year-olds, it's the coolest thing, because they're just like, it is what it is. And this is it. And it's a shame that we lose that. Most of us lose that when we're, as we get older, because of, I don't know, these norms that somehow, got crept into society. But yeah,
there's good reasons, there's good things that you lose, because some people shouldn't do what they, right. Yeah. Like as much as, you recognize that there are good people out there are equally bad people out there if uncontrolled. Right. And so like, you have to be very mindful of, just because you lose the ability to do what you want, doesn't mean that's a bad thing, because people will do absolutely crazy things. And,
it's also, and it's also kind of not necessarily losing it all the way. If you can, there's a time and place for certain things. So if you can be, your blunt and real and true and silly self in certain environments, that's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So with this, are you still doing the show? How long do you kind of expect to do this? Where's it going? How big is it going to be?
When I started, I didn't really know what the trajectory was, and I was doing other shows in parallel. But you know, it's just the story that I keep saying, because it's so funny and frustrating at the same time. So I was in talks, you know, to making this something much bigger with, you know, other producers. And I had a whole US tour lined up. And the very first weekend of the tour was the very first weekend of the shutdown. So it was literally like, okay, it was like infertility, but like theatrical infertility in a way. And
course.
so, yeah, of course. So, you know, that happened. You know, after I was kind of wrapping my brain around what was happening, which also took a while, you know, that pandemic was like, oh, what was happening here? Then I kind of made a switch to virtual, which naturally is not the same as in-person shows for many reasons. But I did go virtual. And last year I had kind of this outdoor performance, and now I'm actually working on new bookings, in-person bookings for the summer. So yeah, it's slowly, hopefully we'll get back into that, because I really think, you know, with every performance, I'm like, maybe I'll do like, I don't know, maybe it'll end in like, I don't know, move on to the next thing in like a month or 2 or 3. But every time I do the show and the responses, I'm like, okay, I got to keep going, because it's like these people, and then they have their friends. I didn't see it. And, you know, I got to explain, you know, so that's just the thing. So now it's like I'm going on this like weird, you know, head against the wall mission to get it out there to as many people. So now like my big kind of weird dream is to have this become a Netflix comedy special, to just like get it out there. So that would be great.
Have you considered, or are you on TikTok?
Okay, so I was on TikTok, but as a mental health person, I'm sure you're aware that TikTok is a very mental health thingy.
It is, right? And
so yeah, it sucks you in, and sometimes gets very depressing and annoying and agitating and stressful. So I was on it. I took a break. I know I should get back on it, kind of like on my terms, but I haven't yet. So I'm there, but I haven't posted in a while.
You know, I've been on TikTok for 2 years, and I absolutely agree. And I find myself getting drawn in every once in a while. But when I kind of started, and I think what I learned in the first few months, because now I'm at, you know, I'm almost to 600,000 followers, and it's been 2 years, and I'm like, I'm figuring it out at this point. I'm kind of like, I'm lowering my access to it because I need to.
Right.
But if you go into it with a business focus of, I'm going to post, I'm not going to watch, right? Of recognizing that this is a tool for the message.
Yeah.
I think it becomes a very incredibly powerful tool, right? You know, like when you step into it as a creator, not a consumer, I think you approach it from an angle that my message is more valuable than me digging into the content. And I'm not saying you know, neither of us are looking at this and saying this is a negative platform. Because,
oh no, of course not. And there's wonderful content on it.
Right. Yeah. We all know TikTok, right? Certainly my followers that are listening to this know TikTok because they know me through TikTok. It can suck you in. It can blast you with all the information that you want to see, you want to hear. And then you find yourself
that you don't want to hear
at 2 o'clock in the morning thinking, why am I not sleeping? But when you step into a message, certainly right now, I don't know where TikTok will be by the time this podcast episode airs, but TikTok is still a huge opportunity for people that are trying to put out messages. You know, it's so easy. It's so simple. It's not that hard to figure out. And when you step into it consistently, you get results, more results than anything else. And I don't think that's really going to go away for a little while, at least. But if I were you, I mean, the infertility kind of discussion is only growing. And if we can get more people kind of talking about it and discussing it, I mean, do it.
Yeah. You're right. I will. Yes. And
yes, absolutely. It's, you know, take your time with it. Right.
Yeah.
You know, like step into the, you know, the TikTok realm of understanding this is what my goal is. This is what I want to do. I want to share my message, and do that, you know?
Yep. Yep.
You have it. You have an important message to share, because it's as uncomfortable or as comfortable as silence might be with this. It's so beneficial to have conversations with people who understand it and are
Right.
compassionate about it and even humorous about it, right? Like that comedy is also very
Yeah.
important because it denotes that we can actually laugh through this as well as cry, because you will do both, right?
Yep.
You will realize
Yep.
that, tracking everything for, 12
Yes.
days in a
It's
row
surreal.
is
Yeah.
ridiculous, and it's
Yeah.
a little crazy, and it makes you crazy, and you can laugh about that,
Yeah.
but you can also cry,
Yeah.
and feel that stuff. And it's hard, but we need people like you.
Thank you. Yeah. Same to you. I think, I, I think mental health, whether infertility or otherwise, it's just, it's unbelievable. I mean, when we were growing up, did we even hear the words mental health? I don't even think they existed.
I
Um, it's
you
not,
weren't allowed to talk about it.
no, but I don't even think mental and health were used together,
No.
and it wasn't a thing that people knew.
Right.
It was just, I don't know. And I think that it's great that you're, putting the word out, first of all, talking about these things, because that's, I think the, as we're saying, the most important kind of first step to kind of put it out there.
Yeah.
Because it's so important. It's something like, people put in so much of their time and energy and finances into like, diets and exercise, like taking care of their physical body, and the mental health is
Right.
even more important, and it's just not talked about as much. It's not given as much of, the space.
Yeah. Well, it is now. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
that's
So
that's
thank you
what I
for that.
think. Well, that's what I think TikTok is really kind of allowed. I think TikTok's kind of that real platform where people are like, I'm tired of this fake stuff that's all over everywhere. And not to say that TikTok isn't fake either, but it's
Right. And
you know
there's, the dancing.
right. Yeah. It's not a dancing app anymore.
I know it's become, which I'm guessing that means all the young kids left, maybe, because they're like, well, we can't dance. This is what it was for.
They're going to move somewhere, and
Yeah.
then that's where everybody else is going to move. Everybody follows
Right.
the kids.
Right. So, but yeah, I mean, it's true. It's, I think, it's great that there is that platform of, getting messages out there that people need to hear.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see one where TikTok goes, but also, I'm being on TikTok and watching how things are discussed. Certainly, like for me, I see a lot of like domestic violence and mental health and that connection, trauma. How trauma is kind of recognized from this point on, because for the last decade or so, I think trauma has actually been at the forefront of discussion. And now there's parts of it where people are almost getting tired of hearing, look, this is a trauma response. I'm tired of this, right? I'm tired of hearing that.
Yeah.
So it's I think I take that as a good sign, because too much information is not a bad thing when it comes to that, where you're starting to recognize parts of yourself, and it almost becomes annoying. But hey, if it annoys you, maybe you should deal with it,
Exactly.
and make
Because
a
it's
change.
better than not knowing anything about it or not hearing these terms ever.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's how we grew up.
Like, yeah, things like, PTSD and things like that, which, by the way, also, I talk about in, with infertility, that, it's just a lot of people automatically, their connotation of PTSD is military, like,
Yep.
Which it isn't. I mean, could be a
Mm-mm.
lot of things. And with infertility, especially, and even with me, like, I'm dealing with PTSD, and it's been like a while, and I understand, and I'm happy with the fact that I know that it will be all the
Yeah.
time. It will be. It is.
I've been in the military for 14 years, and it took me 8 of those years to realize that my PTSD didn't come from the military. It came from my childhood. And
Yeah.
when you start to really recognize that the military does not have a monopoly on PTSD, you start to get really introspective about, oh my God, it happened to me, right?
Yeah.
I went through this. And just simply understanding, like I would say, take PTSD out of it and just look at trauma. How do you define trauma, and how is it relative to you? Because what I go through, you know, on a drill weekend sometimes is highly traumatic. Comparatively to a 3-year-old, right? A 3-year-old trying to do what I do on a drill weekend would traumatize them, right? And so you cannot compare traumas across generations. You cannot compare traumas to other people. You have to look at yourself and say, was this traumatic to me? And how do I define traumatic? Because it probably was. If it's something that recycles in your mind, it probably was traumatic, and it probably still is traumatic if it's still there.
And it will still be. And it's something that it's now part of you, and you have to know how to deal with it.
You have to process it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think the processing is the big thing. It's like, I was talking to someone, I was like, why isn't therapy mandatory for everyone? Because that's like something, you got to know how to deal with your stuff. And, a lot of people don't. Most people don't. We're not taught that.
Right.
And that's also a very important conversation that people don't have, because again, there's a lot of stigma to that. It's like, oh, therapy, that's crazy people. That's not,
Well, that's why I have a job. That's the funny thing, is like, I'm not a certified like therapist or psychologist or anything like that. And so people find me who have either had traumatizing experiences from the mental health system, even like the emergency medical system, or they've just been stigmatized to therapy to say, I won't go to a therapist, they've had bad experiences with therapists.
Right.
So they find me because I would say that I'm that link between having nothing and going to the mental health system. And that's just not okay. So, like, one, I see that in my own work, and I'm like, there's a lot of demand for me. So we need more people like me. But where's the conversation between mental health professionals and like people like myself? And certainly what I do is risky, right? It's risky to me and my mental health, because of the nature of who I deal with are people that are not all that happy with themselves, who are self-destructive, who are suicidal at times. And so that in itself is difficult, but it still needs to be a conversation of like, the mental health system's losing people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who's going to catch them? Who's going to help them? Who's going to support them? Or are we going to let them die? Right. Or become addicts, or become,
hurt themselves
abusers.
or others in a way. Yeah. That is very important. It's a very sad situation that has to be dealt with, for sure.
Yeah. That's what I'm working on.
Good. That's awesome.
So I don't necessarily have any further questions. Do you have any questions or any comments or any thoughts or any things that you want to share before we call it a day?
I mean, I think we can keep this conversation going for hours. I mean, I'm good for now. I don't think I have anything. Maybe, when we finish the conversation, I most likely will be like, oh, I could have said this.
Right.
That's usually what happens.
Let's before I'm gonna save the last question for a little bit further.
Okay.
But before we go, how can people, one, find your show, go to your show, or get in touch with you or watch you?
So I think the best to connect, if it's online, is through my website, which is meiravzur.com. So meiravzur.com. And through there, you can go to the Inconceivable show, my solo show, and find out about that and when performances are coming up and other things I've done. And on social media, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm Inconceivable Show. That's my handle. Mm-hmm. And on Twitter, it's Inconceivable because it was too long. So that's what I got.
Somebody call Elon, fix that one.
Yeah. So, but that's how you can find me on social media. I'm on social media. I'm most active on Instagram, but I will be ending this conversation. And so I will be going back to TikTok also. Perfect. And so that's where you can find me.
I'll see you there.
Awesome.
Well, before we go, you have to answer the last question.
Right.
And the last question is very simple. If there was one message you could leave the world, what would it be?
You are not alone. As cliche as that sounds, but you are not alone, because humans are both extremely unique and extremely similar. So I think that is the most important thing, is don't ever feel alone, because you're not. So it's good to kind of go with your gut with things. And yes, and
I honestly was like, when you started telling me about the improv thing, I was like, that's it. Right. I told you before the show, like everybody kind of gets this point of like, I don't know what to say. And
so wait, so can we re-edit that? So the
Yeah.
answer would simply be yes, and that would be better.
I think if there was one thing that I looked at throughout the show, it was that was, for me, because that's something that I've used. It's something that I've recognized within myself of like, just keep looking for more. Like I look back at my dad's loss, and I'm like, it's not the worst thing that's ever happened to me. It's the thing that changed my life, and so that idea of, it's not negative. It's just there. It's just a thing. Right. And I can even make it positive of like, look at where I am now. Right. Like how many people I've affected 100% started from where my dad made that choice. And so like that ability to say yes and improvise, and adapt and overcome all of this tragedy, all of this trauma, all of these, painful obstacles. It's powerful, right? When you can kind of narrow that down and explain that when you said that, I was like, that's it. That's that one thing that she's going to forget, that's the answer to that question.
Oh, and I did it. Okay. But that's the answer. That's what can we do that? You don't edit, but if you edited it, that's what it'd be.
You know what the best part is?
What?
Everybody heard it before.
Yay.
Before you answer the question. So
I answered it before. You see, I was so good at the yes and that I predicted it.
It's perfect. I love it. I'm glad you said it earlier, and I don't even care if you didn't say it this time. It was well put. It was well said. I think it's so niche to you as well.
Yeah.
Of like the comedy, the theater, like it makes you who you are. And it, like, I see that like in the future of like, that's a piece of you, that yes. And the improvisation, it just fits you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes.
Wonderful.
It's a tool that has been used and taught by the greatest of greats and people you probably know and love. And I just follow it religiously. And I preached it a lot. And now I'm actually also doing it because and I think I've also been doing it with other things, but I think that's it. Yeah. It's yes. And
well, Meirav, it's been an honor. I love this conversation. I think it's so important what you're doing, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you so much as well.
Of course. And for you listeners out there who are still listening, thank you for showing up. Thank you for listening. I hope you find a way to connect with this wonderful woman and have a conversation if you can. And we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience. And that's it.